Hello, and today is day 50 of morning messages from Mrs. Barber. That's me. And thank you for joining me for 50 days of messages. That is a very big number. Today I am bringing you a book from a hero of mine. And did you know that children can be heroes? I think you do know that. I think we've talked about Malala Yousafzai, and this is Ruby Bridges. She is one of the bravest children I have ever heard of in my life. So today's story is historical fiction, which means that it is a true story, and then maybe a few things are changed in the story to make it easier to understand. So this is a story of a girl who lived in America, and she was picked to integrate a school. So our school is very diverse. That means that there are children who come from India, from Turkey, from Mexico, from Europe, from the Pacific Islands, from Vietnam, China, Korea, Japan, so many places. And your class is full of children from all over the world. Well, when Ruby was going to school in America, people believed that because of the color of her skin, the way that she was born, naturally, she should not go to school with other children that looked differently than her. And Ruby going to the school made people very, very angry. So angry, in fact, that she had to have FBI agents as guards. Can you imagine? You're going to school and you have to have a guard to keep you safe. That would be very scary. And so this is a story of Ruby Bridges, one of my heroes in my life. I admire her. I've admired her since I was a young girl. And I'm excited to read this story to you because look around and you will find heroes everywhere. There are heroes. You can be one. And when the news is hard and you might hear things that sound scary, inside of those stories, there are heroes. You just have to look a little closer. So Ruby Bridges by Robert Coles and illustrated by George Ford. It's a big book, so I'll move it back and forth. And this one's a little more serious than we usually read. The story of Ruby Bridges. I know you can handle it. You have a very big brain and a big heart. And there she is. Our Ruby has taught us a lot. She became someone who helped change our country. She was part of history. Just like generals and presidents are part of history, they're leaders, and so was Ruby. She led us away from hate, and she led us nearer to knowing each other, the white folks and the black folks. Ruby's mother. It's a dedication or a foreword. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. We were very poor, very, very poor, Ruby said. My daddy worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops, so my daddy lost his job. And that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I was 4, I think. In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day. After they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit, Ruby's mother said. We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start. At that time, black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. Black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's laws. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the girls were sent to McDonough 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to first grade in the William Frantz Elementary School. So they won the court case to allow their children to go to the school. They fought to get their children into an equal school. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in American history. They went to church. "We sat there and prayed to God," Ruby's mother said, "that we'd all be strong and we'd have courage and we'd get through any trouble. And Ruby would be a good girl and she'd hold her head up high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to the American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard." On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the Friends Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did not help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. So I was a little wrong in my telling of the history. They were marshals that the president sent. And why did the president send those marshals with a little girl? Because she wasn't safe. Because the people were angry at her for coming. And if we were in the classroom right now, and I was reading this book, I would get you to pretend that some of the children in the room are blue and some of the children are green, and say that the blue ones had to go outside in the sun and the green ones could stay inside in the cool classroom and learn with all the toys and the games. And I would ask you if that's fair. If I just assigned a color word to half of our friends and said half of them have to go outside, they can learn if they want to, but it's going to be hotter and it's going to be harder, and we get all the toys, and you would tell me, "Mrs. Barber, no, that's not fair," because you have a good heart and a good mind, and you make up your mind about these things. There's Ruby being very brave. Every day for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to the Friends School surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. And I try to imagine what Ruby felt here. I always try to imagine, but my heart and my mind, I can't really, because I know school like you know school. I don't know school as a place where people would shout at me because I tried to come there. And that would hurt my heart to even really think about our school turning into that. Can you imagine that? It'd be a hard place. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with and to eat with. But every day Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite and she worked well at her desk, Mrs. Henry said. She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom in an empty building. So when these angry people couldn't keep her out of the school, they all took their children away. And this is what Ruby's classroom looked like. She was 6 years old, learning all by herself with her teacher. And her teacher was also brave, too. A lot of people didn't like that her teacher would teach that little girl how to read. Sometimes I'd look at her and wonder how she did it, said Mrs. Henry. How she went through by those mobs and sat there all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even when she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed or hopeful, if she'd gradually begin to wear down, or even decide that she no longer wanted to go to school. Then, one morning, something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did, watching Ruby walk toward the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped, right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there, facing all those men and women. She seemed to be talking to them. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and went into the school. And I can imagine what she might be saying. What might she be saying? What might this brave girl who just wanted to go to school, what might she be telling those angry people? What might her voice say? When she went into the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what had happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped and talked to the people in the street, in the mob. Ruby became irritated. "I didn't stop and talk with them," she said. "Ruby, I saw you talking," Mrs. Henry said. "I saw your lips moving." "I wasn't talking," said Ruby. "I was praying. I was praying for them." Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning, she forgot until she already made it in the middle. She was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried down through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said the prayer she repeated twice a day, before and after school. "Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you." This is the afterword. Later that year, 2 white boys joined Ruby at the Franz Elementary School. Their parents were tired of seeing the boys get into mischief around the house when they could have been in school and learning. The mob became very angry when the first white boys went back to school, but those boys were soon joined by other children. "We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to take the law into their own hands," one parent said. "It's time for us to fight for the side of the law and for our children's right to go to school and get their education." They all did get their education, Ruby and a growing number of boys and girls who went to the school with her. By the time Ruby was in the 2nd grade, the mobs had given up their struggle to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that New Orleans schools be desegregated, so that children of all races might be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to the Franz school. She graduated from it and then went on to graduate from high school. Ruby Bridges is married to a building contractor and has 4 sons who attend school within the New Orleans public school system. Now a successful businesswoman, she has created the Ruby Bridges Educational Foundation for the purpose of increasing parental involvement in schools. For further information about the foundation, that gives the address. There's Ruby. This is a beautiful story. It's a story I hope that you keep in your minds and your hearts. Ruby did something brave, and she did something that a lot of grown-ups can't do. And that is to forgive people for being the way that they are, for being angry or for being opinionated. She said a prayer. She said kind words. And whatever you believe in terms of how you pray, doesn't matter, because the point of it was that Ruby said words of kindness. Ruby said words of hope, and she is very much my hero. And so I hope you loved today's story. I'm proud of you. You are my children heroes too. Like Ruby Bridges, you worked together. You made the buddy bench. You made the Zen den for our school. You care about others. I see it every single day, and I love you, and I'm proud of you.